There comes a moment in every thinking person's life when the ground beneath them begins to tremble. The pillars of certainty, once held firm by logic, reason, and the comforting patterns of routine, begin to crack. You can feel it, the creeping sensation that the world you thought you knew was never real to begin with. You ask yourself questions that have no answers. You look for truths in books, in systems, in doctrines, but every page echoes back with silence. You realize that understanding alone cannot save you, that there is a difference between knowing something and believing it. Søren Kierkegaard called this moment the sickness unto death, a spiritual crisis that isn't about losing your mind, but about losing your soul. He saw faith not as a comfortable belief, but as a violent rupture, a tearing apart of everything you think you know. Because real faith doesn't come when life makes sense. It doesn't bloom in clarity. It is born in the darkness, in the silence that follows the collapse of logic. Kierkegaard wasn't interested in shallow, organized religion. He saw it as a social performance, a way for people to avoid the terrifying responsibility of facing God directly. He wanted something deeper, raw, dangerous, real, and he believed that to encounter the divine, you must first walk to the very edge of yourself, to the cliff where logic ends, and jump. This he called the leap of faith. But what does that even mean? Imagine standing on a ledge, staring into blackness. Behind you, everything you know. Ahead of you, nothing you can prove. No safety net, no evidence, no guarantees. And yet something in you whispers, jump. Kierkegaard believed that this leap was not a one-time act. It is a constant decision to embrace the unknown, to commit to something your mind cannot fully grasp. Because the mind will always demand certainty. It will beg for evidence. It will scream for logic. But the soul doesn't need proof. The soul seeks meaning. Faith, to Kierkegaard, was not the opposite of doubt. It was born inside doubt. It thrived within it. And that is what makes it terrifying. Most people will never take the leap. They will cling to certainty, to systems, to second-hand beliefs. They will perform faith, but never live it, because real faith demands everything. It demands that you risk your sanity, your security, even your identity. It demands that you abandon the illusion of control and walk into the storm. Have you ever felt that storm coming? Not outside you, but within. That quiet internal war between what you know and what you feel to be true. That is where faith begins. And that is where Kierkegaard invites you to walk beyond reason, to fall, to trust that in the very act of falling, something higher might catch you. But what if it doesn't? What if faith is not a promise of safety, but a test of courage? Would you still jump? Most people don't jump. They build scaffolds instead, illusions, performances. They go to church, follow rituals, recite prayers, ... But inside, they are still standing on the edge, paralyzed. They never actually leap. Kierkegaard called this the life of the aesthetic man, someone who exists only on the surface. He chases beauty, pleasure, distractions, and comfort to avoid the ache of meaninglessness gnawing at his core. He lives to be entertained, not awakened. But deep down, in the silence of his own being, he knows something is missing. He feels a void that no pleasure can fill, a sickness no medicine can cure. That sickness is despair, not despair as sadness, not depression, but a specific kind of spiritual despair, the torment of being alienated from your true self. To Kierkegaard, this is the most dangerous state of all, because it doesn't always hurt. It disguises itself as comfort, as stability, even as happiness. But it is, in fact, a slow death of the soul. And here's the terrifying part. Most people will live their entire lives this way, smiling, functioning, dying inside. Faith, then, is not just a leap toward God. It is a rebellion against that aesthetic existence. It is a refusal to settle for a hollow life. It is a declaration. I want truth, even if it breaks me. But to want truth is to walk through fire. It means losing the lies you've lived in. It means dismantling the ego. It means giving up your false sense of control. The leap of faith is not an act of certainty. It is an act of defiance against despair. And it's not clean. It's not poetic. It's messy, terrifying, chaotic. It tears you apart before it puts anything back together. So why would anyone do it? Because something inside you knows that comfort is not enough. That there is something beyond logic, beyond safety, beyond appearances. Something real. Have you ever looked around and wondered, is this all there is? Have you ever felt like you were playing a role in a script you didn't write? Faith begins when you stop pretending, when you stop performing, when you look into the void and finally whisper, enough. Not because you have the answers, but because you're ready to seek something that cannot be explained. And that's the point where everything begins to change. But not gently, never gently. The moment you whisper enough, something inside you breaks. The shell begins to crack. The scaffolding of your false self collapses. And for the first time, you see what lies beneath it all. Fear. Raw, naked, unfiltered fear. Not fear of death, but fear of the unknown. Fear of becoming someone else. Fear of what happens when you truly surrender. And yet this fear is sacred. It is the threshold, the abyss, the sacred fire that separates the seeker from the spectator. Kierkegaard believed that standing at this edge is the most human moment of all. Because here, you are no longer protected by dogma or social norms, or even your own thoughts. Here, you are exposed. And in that exposure, something ancient stirs. Call it God, call it truth, call it your eternal self. But know this, it does not come to comfort you. It comes to confront you, to demand everything you're still hiding. This is the paradox Kierkegaard saw at the heart of faith, that in order to find your true self, you must first be willing to lose it. You must become a stranger to who you've been. You must walk into the unknown, not with answers, but with surrender. And it is here that most people turn back, because the unknown is not romantic. It is brutal. It strips you of identity, ambition, logic, ego. It tears down the story you've told yourself about who you are. It is death, in every sense, except physical. But on the other side of that death, Kierkegaard believed there is something more. Not proof, not certainty, but a kind of peace that transcends both. A peace born from knowing that you no longer need to pretend, that you are no longer performing, that you have stared into the void and still chosen to love. Love what? Perhaps you can't name it. Perhaps it's just ... being. But in that being, in that choice to remain open despite the pain, you find something unshakable. Faith, not belief in doctrines, not emotional hope, but faith as an act of radical trust in what cannot be known. Have you ever trusted something you couldn't see? Have you ever bet your life on a whisper? If not, what are you waiting for? Faith is not found in answers. It is forged in the furnace of unknowing. The leap is not the end. It's the beginning of a transformation, one that burns everything false and leaves only what cannot be destroyed. Kierkegaard believed that once you leap, you do not land, you become the leap. You live in a state of radical openness, of perpetual surrender, and this terrifies the world around you. Because a person who no longer clings to certainty cannot be controlled. They cannot be predicted. They cannot be bought. They cannot be manipulated by fear. Faith makes you dangerous, not to others, but to the system, to the illusion, to the empire of comfort and distraction we've built around ourselves. Because once you taste real meaning, artificial meaning becomes unbearable. This is why those who take the leap often feel like outcasts, misunderstood, alone. But solitude is not the same as isolation. In solitude, you find your true voice. You learn to listen. You begin to see that what you thought was emptiness was actually depth. Faith does not make life easier, it makes it real. And reality is hard. But within that hardness is a beauty deeper than pleasure, a joy deeper than happiness, a kind of sacred grief that purifies the soul. You begin to see suffering differently, not as punishment, not as failure, but as part of the process, part of the stripping away. Because to believe, truly believe, is to stand in front of the infinite and say, I do not understand you, but I trust you. That trust doesn't come from certainty, it comes from courage. And courage doesn't come from strength, it comes from surrender. So ask yourself, what are you still holding on to? What false certainty are you still clinging to? And what would happen if you let it burn? At the edge of logic, there is no roadmap. There is no promise. There is only the question, will you jump? Not because you know what comes next, not because it feels good, not because you were told to, but because something in you recognizes that staying where you are is no longer an option. Because deep down, you know that the life you've built on certainty is too small for the soul you're becoming. Faith is not a destination, it is a direction. It is choosing mystery over method, surrender over strategy, being over knowing, and that choice, it must be made again and again, every day, every moment. There is no final leap, only the next one, and the next, and the next, each time more terrifying, each time more freeing, until you no longer fear the fall, until you realize that there was never anything beneath you to catch you. Because there was never anything to fear in the first place. Because the void you feared was not death, it was truth. And truth, once faced, becomes light. So here you are, at the edge. You can go back to safety, to appearances, to sleep, or you can take the leap into the unknown, into yourself, into a faith that begins not where the story ends, but where the illusion does. So, now I ask you, with no answers, no guarantees, will you jump?